Dr. Mimi Syed, great to have you.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear, loud and clear.
Great.
So, thank you again for joining us. A few weeks ago, we had your colleague, Dr. Feroz, on. He was the author of the controversial New York Times article, and you were essentially the photographer in many instances. There was the photo of the CT scan where you could clearly see a bullet in someone's head. Twitter then instantly became ballistic experts and decided on their own that that is a fake image. Um, I didn't hear from any real ballistics experts, but that's what the Twitter experts said. So here we are with the photographer of that clearly fabricated photo, and those just listening to the audio, I put that in quotations. So thank you, Dr. Mimi Syed. Can you tell us more about just your experience in Gaza? Expand on those photos. I know you have some photos you want to show here, and we will show them. But yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Actually, Twitter is a new world for me, so I never had Twitter before, but apparently everyone's an expert in everything. Yeah, I mean, the conditions in Gaza, as you already know, they're horrific. They're just, I mean, unimaginable. I had never done disaster work before, or been in a conflict zone, but I trained in high trauma cities like New York and Chicago. I worked in New York and trained in Chicago. I'm from Chicago. So, gunshot wounds are not like foreign to me in any way. I'm very comfortable with that. And I have extensive experience in trauma. But the thing that stuck out to me the most in Gaza was just the number of pediatric cases. When I went to Gaza, I took many pictures for medical education. When I returned, I kind of filed them and processed them. And about 85% of the photos that I had, which obviously was not everything I saw, were pediatric cases. And these were ranging from GSWs, gunshot wounds, to explosive injuries, to shrapnel, yeah, all sorts of things, but most of them women and children. And I think the UN recently published like over 70% of those casualties were children as well, or women and children. So, um, yeah, I mean, horrific. I mean, the not just the actual injuries and the extent of them, but the fact that there is no medical aid allowed, no supplies, equipment allowed into Gaza. For example, I, as a healthcare worker, I'm not allowed to bring anything in. There's just so many things that are needed, just basic airway supplies that I was told to leave, that I can't take in. So it's, I don't see any reason to stop those things from entering. Basic things like soap and cleaning agents, things like that. And I'm sure you are aware of all of those things. But yeah, atrocious, just unimaginable.
Yeah, I could only imagine. I do want to point something out just for the sake of clarity. So you are right that the UN came out with a report, which I actually haven't. This is the second time I'm hearing about it, but it is from a few days ago. Around 70% of deaths in Gaza are women or children. Based on my independent investigation, I would put that number at closer to 50%. But if the UN has information that I'm not aware of, then I will update that. But this is based on extensive hours of research. 50% seems to be a more accurate estimation. Again, that's not justifying anything. It's still horrific, and it should be much lower than that. Now, which hospital did you serve at?
At Nasser, I was there for a month, from August to September. And that's the hospital that has the most resources, and very loosely, I'm using that term, most resources. It's not a fully functioning hospital. It has a CT scanner, which is very unique in the Gaza Strip. It's the only one that does. And then it's got surgical capabilities and such, but still very lacking, in what it can offer.
So, okay, there's only one CT in all the hospitals.
That's what I understand. Yeah. And it was at Nasser. And, it requires electricity. So
Right, right.
there were many times where there was no power. So it was very challenging, to say the least.
What? when we hear about the state of the hospitals in Gaza, because a report did come out saying that out of the 36 hospitals in Gaza, only around 13 are now functional. I'm trying to better understand what makes a hospital no longer functional. Is it lack of medical staff? Is it lack of medical equipment? Or do these hospitals have infrastructural damage? And I know you didn't get to tour all these hospitals, but I'm wondering if you have any idea on that.
Yeah, so you're using the term hospital in the sense that we use the standard here in the US or, somewhere else that's fully functioning. That a hospital requires much more than just a tent. They're calling the field hospitals hospitals. Many of them are just basic triage, basic like first aid care. A hospital is functional when it can do all of its, necessary things to save lives, to provide the care, the ongoing care. None of the hospitals are, in fact, fully functional. Fully functional is a contextual term. It's fully functional. Nasser is based on comparing it to all the other hospitals. I You can't do surgery at every hospital. You can't do wound care at every hospital. You can't treat burns at every hospital. So those terms are very loosely used, and I'm not sure 13 is accurate right now. But Nasser, of course, I was at Nasser, and that was the hospital with the most resources, and that was saying not much because I was there and I saw that there was not gauze at certain times. We couldn't do surgery because we ran out of gauze. Um, that's not a fully functioning hospital. If
Right.
you are cleaning the floors of a hospital with dirty water and just pushing it around, that's not a fully functioning hospital. So just imagine what the field hospitals are suffering, or the other hospitals are suffering, if the most heavily
Right.
resourced hospital doesn't even have disinfectant agents. There are times where there's no water, running water. I brought my own soap because there's no soap, but there was no running water. So I just put soap on my hands and that's it. And I, waited till the water turned back on again. So
When it comes to the other hospitals, from what I understood, Gaza has a unique situation where they have a lot of really small hospitals that we wouldn't even consider to be hospitals from a Western standard. It's more like a medical facility. And the reason for this is there's a lot of, let's say, families that would donate a hospital to Gaza. It's their contribution under their name. So it's like a smaller medical facility. So I think when we get the number 13, we're describing those smaller facilities as well. Yeah.
probably, yeah, I would suspect, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so what do you do if you need to do surgery but you don't have the equipment?
You don't do surgery. There was a day where surgery was halted because there was no gowns or gauze. I saw them make like makeshift gowns just out of torn things. There was in the ER in the trauma bay that I was working, because they wanted to kind of preserve the sterile gauze. They made gauze out of like pieces of cotton and just kind of rolled them up. And it's just, I mean, it's not necessary. You just become creative and you just do what you can. But yeah, for example, neurosurgery, right? Neurosurgery requires like almost a day of no traffic inside of the OR just to sterilize it. So in normal circumstances, that's how neurosurgery ORs operate. You can't have any sort of contamination. There was flies in the OR. I mean, that's not a sterile environment, but it's like by any standard. So doing the surgery for someone is probably more harmful than not doing it, because they'll end up with terrible infections, especially when it comes to
Mm.
neurosurgery.
Mm. And from what I understood, if you're malnourished, you're not going to heal nearly as well.
Exactly, and almost everybody is malnourished, or even the healthcare workers. So healing is completely delayed for that reason. So anyone who does receive intervention, the post-op care is non-existent for a lot of reasons. Not only because they're malnourished, but because they're going back to a dirty environment where they can't even care for their wounds, their post-op wounds, or any other aftercare instructions that they have.
When you say that almost everyone's malnourished, how can you tell? What's a sign that you can conclude something like that?
So there's something called temporal wasting, right? There's this area here in your temple that shouldn't have a huge indentation in it. Most of the people there have that. It's a huge indentation, and it's a term that we actually use in medical charting, temporal wasting, and a lot of people have that there. The healthcare workers themselves, I mean, they show you pictures of them before this all started, and it's like you're looking at a different person. And that's a rapid weight loss. So anytime you have a rapid weight loss, you're going to be deficient in minerals and
Mm,
nutrients.
mm,
So
mm, mm.
that's the state of most of the people there. And the children, children can become malnourished very easily, very quickly. And most of those children, they're so small for their age. I mean, I saw kids similar to my kids' age, and they were like half the size. They look like they were half their age, but they're older than some of my kids, but they were so tiny. So and it's not just a year. It's like, for kids, it can become a chronic issue, and then their bones aren't growing, and so they're just generally small.
Mm. Yeah, it seems like, I've done a fair bit of work trying to get an estimate of the death toll in Gaza, and there's two factors that are very hard to account for currently. One is those who are still missing, right? They're maybe buried under rubble. And second are those dying from indirect causes, which currently are not being reported on the official list released by the Gaza Ministry of Health. So I put a very, for that reason, I put a very broad estimate, anywhere between 40,000 civilians killed to over 100,000. At this point, I think it's probably closer to 100,000, based on my estimation and just research I've done from past conflicts, trying to see the ratio between direct and indirect, or accounted for versus unaccounted for. Um, do you get a similar impression that there's a lot of indirect deaths? Like, what do you think the state of indirect deaths are in Gaza currently?
Oh, I mean, you don't have to quote me, but the Lancet published numbers and projected numbers of what they think the estimate is. And I think this was months ago, but that was 186,000 at that time.
Yeah.
And,
That was a future. They said over time it will get to that. I believe that's the framing, that they believe that given where we are today, over the next how many months or years, we'll get to 176,000, I believe. And
yeah, that was quite
yeah,
some time ago. So
right, right.
it's not 40 something thousand. There's just every day we saw patients come in with indirect causes because they didn't have access to certain things. Diabetics, for example, dialysis patients that took high blood pressure
Mm,
medications, all coming in with, complications because they didn't have their medications. There's no refrigeration, right? So you can't preserve medications like insulin. So you would get patients coming in. I mean, I never had in my career so many diabetic ketoacidosis coming in all at once. And it was a daily thing. It was like oh, this is our new normal type of thing. And so that's just that type of patient. But there's so many, I mean, there would be patients coming in as trapped under the rubble. That were not accounted for, but they were coming in days later. So it wasn't when that airstrike happened that day, but days later. So I don't know how many are trapped in. I can't project a number. I don't have that an exact number or anything, but it's definitely more than what's being reported.
right. And even if it's not somebody missing, it could still very well be unreported. So, for example, let's say your child dies of malnutrition. What's even the reason to bring them to hospital if they're already dead? You're going to a place that's way
Right.
overcrowded. Might be more disease there. You need to risk your life going there. People might just be burying their children or their grandparents rather than bringing them to hospitals. So it's not even people buried. I think just because the state of the healthcare system in Gaza is creating a situation where people are just dying and being buried. So I think it'll take some time, uh, once the dust settles and international observers are able to come in and we're actually able to count the dead, that we'll get a more accurate number.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then there's patients that will come in and die of sepsis, right? The cause is sepsis. which is an infection that went kind of crazy, but went untreated. And the sepsis came from, a shrapnel injury that they had a few months ago or a few weeks ago. So
Mm.
it's not counted as a military conflict. It's counted as, oh, the the patient died of sepsis. But
Right.
so there, and God knows how many those are. We're not accounting for all of them. And like you said,
Right.
there are patients that are or people that are trapped or can't. The ambulance can't get to them. The cars can't get to them. I remember a family standing outside of Nasser one day, and they were on the phone with their relatives, just crying and crying. And I asked my translator, so what are they saying? So that they're saying, their family members are trapped in Rafah and they can't get out. There's no one that's able to go to them, and they had injuries. They just weren't able to come to the hospital. So what happened
Mm.
to them? I mean, how were they
Right.
accounted for? So I
Right.
can only imagine how many like that there are.
Quite horrific, to say the least. Would you like to show some of the photos that you sent me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. If you can ring them up,
Yeah. Let's bring
absolutely.
them up.
I can talk about them.
So these are photos that the New York Times didn't want to publish. Is that
I
right?
sent you quite a few, but
The,
for showed you some of them.
I'm talking
But
about the ones you sent specifically yesterday.
yeah, I sent
All
you
right,
quite a
we'll
few
open it up.
yesterday. Yeah.
So to viewers, a little warning. It's a, I think one of them is a little bit gruesome. Nothing horrific, but if you're super sensitive, I would maybe not look at this part.
So I think all of the ones that I sent you were all kids with reported quadcopters that shot them. Yeah, this is a child that was shot in the head and reported to be a quadcopter. Uh, so those, yeah, I sent you multiple with children that were,
Yep. So we have
reported
this one.
quadcopter. Yeah.
So this is the quadcopter reporting that comes from the family.
Yeah, so every time a patient would come in or a mass casualty, it was normal practice to ask what happened. And I had a translator with me at all times. And we would say, what happened? And they would say, oh, a quadcopter came and, shot them. Or we heard a quadcopter, we saw a quadcopter. And so that famous kind of picture with the child with the bullet in the head in New York Times, that was a child that was reportedly eating breakfast in her tent, and then a quadcopter came and shot her. Um, and so that was very common. That was what was reported. In my time there, I didn't hear anyone say sniper. They would always say quadcopter, and it was mixed in with the other casualties. So there would be like an airstrike, for example, and then there would be patients coming in with explosive injury, but then there were also patients coming in with single shots that were reported to be quadcopters at the same time. I
Interesting.
mean, there were similar injuries. So, and we look for patterns. A lot of times, like patterns start to stick out, and you start to notice these things. But it would be patients with similar injuries. For example, there was a day where the entire ICU was filled with single gunshots to the head. All of the patients were, teenagers or they were all palliative care. They were intubated when they were alive when they arrived, but there was nothing to do for them because the injury was just so devastating. So it was pretty common.
And for those who don't know, a quadcopter is think of it as like an armed drone type of thing, a drone that can shoot, which means whoever's taking these shots is sitting behind a computer, um, taking these shots. They
And I
themselves are
don't,
not.
and I don't know, Adar, you probably know better than I do. And I think some of these have like artificial intelligence too, because um, I don't know how they work, but I would imagine that
Yeah,
like
I
that's
think
probably
for the most
happening.
part, AI is not taking the actual shot, just helping with data collection. So it might inform about there's a viable target, for example. How much weight the actual person pulling the trigger is giving the AI, that's hard to know, but AI is being used to some extent to identify targets and whatnot. Um,
Well, that's what I wanted to, mention is
Yeah.
that that's something I noticed is when we would see these patients come in, they would usually have like a similar demographic. They were, so if it was like a teenage girl, I had two teenagers that came in one day, both 15, 16-year-old visiting each other in their tent. They were doing pre-wedding ceremonies and celebrating for another family member. And both of them came in with a single shot to the head, and it was reported by family it was a quadcopter. Then subsequently, two more came in with a similar demographic with a gunshot to the head. So that's why I wonder, is it, AI kind of assisting that, and that's what's happening. But those are the patterns, I notice. And I know my other colleagues notice the same thing too.
Mm. I'm trying to make sense of the patterns that you're describing, like how when there was an airstrike that corresponded with shots to the head. I'll need to think about that and talk to some people who I analyze things with. But I need to try to make sense of that.
Yeah, a surgeon actually just did a testimony just yesterday, I think, and said the same thing too. And I found it interesting because, like, oh my gosh, I was there with him and I didn't ask him either, but we were there at the same time and we individually noticed these things. But it's interesting, and I don't know if it's temporal, like if it was when we were there in those months, or if other people are also noticing this. But it was usually together, or it was a mass casualty incident with an airstrike, and then quadcopters in addition to it, or quadcopters,
Right.
and then later followed by airstrikes. So there's definite patterns there, but I'm not an expert in.
You froze for a moment. Mimi, are you here? Oh
Yes.
yeah, you froze for a moment. Yeah, I'm gonna actually brainstorm this with some people that I work with who help me make sense of things. Uh, I will get back to you if I reach some kind of a conclusion of the patterns you're seeing. Here, let's run through some of the other photos.
Sure.
So this one, what this is like a 3D imaged CT scan. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, so this is something that it's like a 3D reconstruction, and you can see just the skull, obviously, but then the path of, the bullet there. Um,
And
but yeah.
this is the skull of a child.
Yeah,
It looks
you can
like
see the suture lines there. That's a child.
this. Oh, the skull
Yeah,
not fully
yeah,
connected.
yeah, yeah, it's still growing. And that was, I believe, from the same patient, removed from the same patient, still has hair on it. But that was from, I believe it corresponded to that image. I have it organized in my files, but I kind of just sent you some bunch of random photos there.
Why didn't the New York Times put this one up? This one is this considered too gruesome? Because I feel like this is a lot more compelling.
Yeah, I sent a bunch of them. I'm not sure why, but yeah, I mean, all of them never, didn't get reconstruction. It's if we asked the radiologist, could you do a reconstruction on this, and they would, show it to us. But
Mm.
um, yeah,
This
that's the
was the
one.
one that people saw.
Yeah, yeah, that was the child that I told you, around 4 years old, that was eating breakfast in her tent. Um, and it was reported a quadcopter incident. So
Can I show this
this is,
video too?
yeah, you can show that. That's the video. That's the CT scan that goes with that image. So the first image you showed was a scout film. Um, it doesn't have as high radiation, and it's not meant for diagnostic purposes. It's for the technician, actually, to position the patient. Um, but it shows just a bullet. But this is the path of the bullet, and you can clearly see
Mm.
it. I think
Yeah.
Feroz pointed this out in his interview, but that corresponds
Yeah.
to that.
Right here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Now this one is a little bit hard to see for those who are squeamish. This is an exit wound, or
That's the one wound on one child. Yeah, and that was a reported quadcopter incident. This is a different child.
okay.
This child was about 3 years old. That's the corresponding CT.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, hard to stomach.
Yeah, and like I said, that was not, those were not the only patients I saw. Those were just ones that I was able to capture. But many of the patients I saw were under 12 years old. So it's hard to mistake them for adults, but it just makes you wonder, what to conclude from that. As physicians, it's our job to collect data and then make conclusions based on it. That's what we do on a regular
Right.
daily basis. We make conclusions based on what we're seeing. And it's hard to say that those are an accident. It's very difficult to say that for me and to believe that when you're seeing it day in and day out. We had
Right.
mass casualty incidents at least twice a day, almost every day, for 4 weeks. That's a lot. If you count those numbers up, that's quite a bit. Um, so
Yeah, I would agree. I would say if you occasionally see a child that has a gunshot wound, you can conclude that it may be collateral damage. But the second it's a consistent pattern, it's much harder to conclude that it's collateral damage. There seems to be an intentionality. Again, this doesn't make the case that this is systemic, that there's a command from above to do this. I think there's a higher likelihood that these are, call them rogue soldiers, acting in a system with close to no accountability for committing war crimes, which, when there's no accountability for doing horrific things, people are less incentivized to behave in accordance with international law.
yeah, I
It
mean,
would
I
be
don't know if the higher ups know about it. I mean, I can't imagine they don't know about it. If this has been, reported over and over and over again, it's hard to just say I didn't know about it.
Oh no, I think they might know. I think there's a difference between them turning a blind eye and commanding it themselves. So I think they very well do know about it. They're just turning
Yeah.
a blind eye. It would be harder to prove they're commanding it. They might be. It's just there's no way to actually prove that. Um, but we do know that there's a social cost to in Israel, a social and political cost to holding soldiers accountable. We saw that when the prison guards in Sde Tayman were arrested. So turning a blind eye is the convenient thing to do.
Yeah,
That,
fortunately.
yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Hmm.
Super Kripke goes, the dust on the screen gives you a sense of the hospital itself. I think that's a good point. The one here, let me try to pull that up real quick.
Yeah, and that was one thing that people on Twitter were saying, well, what's the jagged edges on the bullet? Well, those are pixels, and it's pixelated because I'm taking a picture of a computer screen that's probably
Right.
antiquated. These are not like high resolution images.
You can see the, here, let me pull it up real quick so people can see. You see all that dust down there? It shows, I mean, a hospital that's functioning properly is not going to have a computer screen that's that dirty.
Right,
Right.
right.
Yeah, it shows the state.
Yeah.
Um, on a more personal level, I recognize that to be a doctor that deals with trauma, you very well might be bringing on trauma to yourself, right? You're dealing with physical trauma, but you're taking on an emotional trauma. Do you feel that what you saw in Gaza, even though you were used to seeing, let's say, gunshot wounds, was a different level of horror that you're feeling some kind of emotional or psychological impact of?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure we all have. And when I think about it, it's nothing compared to the healthcare workers and the people in Gaza. So that's what keeps me going. They've been doing this day in and day out for over a year. So whatever I'm feeling, it's nothing compared to that. So I think that, I'm sure all of us have endured this trauma, and at some point we'll deal with it. But so, it's important to keep that as a goal and focus on that. But of course, it's traumatic. Anyone with any sensibility is going to have some kind of traumatic response to this, because this is not normal. This is not natural. In fact, this is not American. This is un-American, to just turn a blind eye and to not say anything when you witness something like this.
It's un-American the way America should be. Unfortunately, this standard of leveling buildings and using this amount of heavy firepower in populated cities is a standard that the United States set, at least in the 21st century. Israel has taken it to a whole nother level the past year, but it's certainly propped up and supported, and I don't know if I want to use the word inspired by, but definitely in a sense seems influenced by Israel's engagement in Iraq, for example. And this whole idea how the concept of an airstrike is normalized. I want us to really think about that, right? What's an airstrike? An airstrike is dropping hundreds to thousands of pounds of explosives, generally on a populated on an area that has civilians. Think about the destruction that causes.
Yeah,
Not just
these
the
are
physical, the
intense.
psychological. It's
Right,
the
right,
whole idea that it's just some airstrikes. It's precision airstrikes.
right.
We're gonna look
Yeah,
back. We're gonna look back and see this as truly barbaric.
I
Um,
just learned what bunker bombs were. I mean, I'm not military trained or anything, but bunker bombs are not meant to be dropped on tents. These are meant to destroy underground, and these are being dropped on tents with children in it. So, like you said, I mean, this is not normal. This is not natural. Like I was saying before about, I grew up I grew up in the United States. I was born and raised in the United States. I don't know anything else. My parents raised us very patriotic, in fact. And this feels very un-American to me.
mhm.
And that's why I feel the need to work towards ending it, to help towards ending it, and to witness what we've seen. It's just I can't understand as a patriotic American how you can just look the other way. That's to me still it's mind boggling to me. I don't understand it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's sad, but it's their legacy that they're ruining with what side here they're taking. And by saying what side, this doesn't mean this doesn't imply that it's the pro-Palestine side
Right.
against the pro-Israel side. No, this is the side of humanity, the side of
Right.
international law.
Yes.
Um, I'm not to be against what we're seeing doesn't mean you're saying from the river to the sea Palestine will be free. You're saying that even if you are engaging in a military conflict, you have a responsibility to engage in a certain way. And that is very clear. And, we've evolved as a species to the point where we could look at October 7th and generally recognize that such an attack is considered barbaric. But in our mindset, we still see this more industrial warfare of dropping airstrikes as perfectly normal. That's just a normal way to deal with problems. The level of barbarism we view in October 7th, one day we will look back and consider this to be similar, if not worse, just because of the scale of it all and how many people have been killed. And I say that I know I'm making a prediction on future human perspective, but I say this with a high degree of certainty.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing I want to mention is, you speak up about it. I speak up about it. There's, few of us that speak up about it, but when you do, you risk a lot politically or, socially or in your career. And that, again, is very un-American. Free speech is just one of the things you associate with the US. And it doesn't feel that way anymore.
Mm.
It's less and less every day.
We have a question from one of the viewers. By the way, the same viewer says that Dr. Syed is a patriot, so I'm getting a compliment there. But then Super Kripke asks, Dr. Syed, are you getting offers for interviews in American media?
Some, yes, yes.
That's positive that there is uh, some coverage of it. Certainly not enough, but
Well, I mean,
that's
what
encouraging.
recently someone reached out about the polio vaccine and they want to know about the polio vaccine. And, it frustrates me a little bit because we're talking about polio vaccines when we're dropping bombs on children. Well, those polio vaccines are useless. And really, it's kind of losing sight of what's important there.
Right, right, right.
Vaccines don't protect against, large bunker bombs and drones and quadcopters shooting at you. So, it's hard to talk about something like a vaccine when that's happening, or just a systemic destruction of the infrastructure of their population. That's the most important thing to talk about, not a polio vaccine. But yeah, those, it depends on the time and what they're interested in, but they do reach out sometimes.
Yeah, well put. Any any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to share with us before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I mean, just what I was saying at the end there, this is and I hope that your viewers and other people recognize that this is a systemic destruction of this population. There's no other way to describe it. When you witness it, you know it. Halting education for children for over a year is not normal. Stopping cleaning agents from coming in, like disinfectants from coming in. I don't see a reason to stop medical aid from coming in. I don't see a reason to stop food from coming in. Those are all strategic things, in my opinion, and I think that that's pretty common knowledge at this point. But this is not necessary. If you're trying to defend your country, it's not necessary to stop those things from coming in. And if you have healthcare workers that have been background checked and vetted by the organizations, by NGOs, why are you stopping them from bringing in life-saving medical equipment and supplies? That's what I want to know. So, those are just some thoughts that people should have, some questions about why is it happening like this? Why are you stopping simple things from coming in? Um, and that's the bottom line. I'm not the only healthcare worker saying this. Many of us have witnessed this and are speaking to it. But if I could say anything, it would be to think independently and question things. Don't just go by what the masses are telling you.
That's a radical piece of advice right there. Think about things on your own. I don't know. I don't know,
Yeah,
Dr.
I
Mann. That's
know we're
done.
all capable of that.
But no, I agree. I agree completely. And thank you so much for giving us the time and just for your courage. You're putting yourself out there to get attacked, to have your character questioned, uh, just in order for you to speak an important truth. So I commend you for your courage, um, and I hope more people hear what you have to say. So thanks so much, Dr. Mimi Syed. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Bye bye.
Okay, a lot of confirmation from what we heard from Feroz, Dr. Feroz. One difference. It's interesting because Dr. Feroz was able to bring in only whatever equipment he could carry with him. So it seems like he was able to bring in a little bit more, but it just the fact that doctors are bringing their own equipment doesn't make any sense. I mean, the aid should be coming in. Um, in terms of food distribution, there's been a lot of contention here. I think food's coming in just not being distributed. I think you have a problem that there's a lack of distribution. The roads are destroyed. Um, there's no organization or institution that's in charge of this food distribution, so it's kind of chaotic. People are risking their lives trying to get flour. Um, Also, I would imagine the quality of the food is probably uh, like a lot of flour, really heavy on the carbs, low on the protein, low on the fresh produce. These are harder to transport. So even if looking at how many calories are coming in actually is not the right way to look at it. It's the quality of the calories. Um, if you were getting 2,000 calories a day in bread, you're going to become malnourished, right? So it's not just calories coming in.